All right, good morning, everybody. And I'm saying good morning because I know, interestingly, this webinar, we have a lot of people from the US. Usually we get a mix from all over the world. What's interesting is it shows that it's a burning hot topic here in the United States. So welcome, everyone. Welcome back to Human Capital Growth's webinars on evidence-based talent management practices. If you've joined us before, you know that these are public service webinars, and we try to bring the best and the brightest who are actively translating the science into practice to bring you what works and what works fast. So welcome back if you've joined us before. If you haven't engaged with human capital growth in any capacity in the past, I'd like to provide a very brief introduction in the following slide. And thank you, Alan.
Sure.
So here, if you haven't met me or any of my team members in the past, human capital growth, we focus on two key areas of work. So Alan, could we go back to just the previous slide? Sorry, Alan's going to share his screen, and I'm just doing a brief introduction here. We do work in two key areas. One is leadership excellence, and the other is talent management excellence, which is a whole suite of practices around designing talent strategies that are distilled from your business imperatives, and designing the systems, doing the analytics, and also educating HR on evidence-based practices. The foundation of all the work that we do at Human Capital Growth is the science, is the evidence that comes primarily from science, meta-analytics, and your data, company data, as well as empathy, walking in our customers' shoes and really understanding what is important to them. And we work with a number of customers. Now, when we do these public service webinars, our intention is to spread the science. The science is powerful, and the answers can help you get results, better results faster. So in the next slide, what I'd like to show is the list of various webinars and podcasts that we've done. Again, all of this is free because we believe that we will all live in a better society if we practice what really works. And so in that spirit, we bring out we do a ton of systematic reviews, which are presented as webinars and then eventually ebooks or blogs. So if any of these topics are things you're working on and you're looking for what does the science have to say and what is industry struggling with, because that's the nexus that we operate in, then you might find some good answers. And in today's the webinar, our focus is on performance management, which we've done a number of in the past, talking about what is happening in the industry, particularly the companies that have changed their performance management practice. We had Rob Olander-Crane from Gap present a couple years ago of what they've been learning, and that was fascinating. And today we have with us Alan Colquitt, Dr. Alan Colquitt, and he is extraordinary and a rare scientist practitioner. So Alan, if you could go, I know that people can see you on the video, but if we could also just get to the next screen, then I can a little bit more about you.
There we go.
And because I know some people will only probably see the slides in the future, so that's why we put the images up here. Alan spent a career at Eli Lilly doing organizational effectiveness, helping build systems, a lot of which was around performance management. Interestingly, he also has spent a lot of time looking at the science and trying to put those into practice and see what works and what doesn't. Alan wrote a book a couple years ago, which is very popular, particularly around the more strategic and science-minded organizations. The book is called Next Generation Performance Management, The Triumph of Science Over Myth and Superstition. Very apt title for things that we care about, and I think organizations are starting to care about as well. And we're very fortunate to have Alan come share what he has learned with all of you today. So thank you, Alan. Welcome to our webinar, and I know we're talking about doing more things together to make the science more applicable, relevant, and broadly available to people all around the world. So we'll talk about that at the end of this webinar. But welcome everyone. Thank you for joining us, and I'm going to turn things over to Alan.
Great, thanks, Shreya. I never thought about what I'm doing as a public service, but it seems very high-minded, which is good. So yeah, Shreya and I are kindred spirits. I'm very much an evidence-based guy, and have been a kind of a practitioner, more of a scientist-based practitioner for 30 plus years. So most everything the way I approach these problems is starting with the science, and this is why I was so intrigued with performance management, because I started with the science and I was fairly surprised by the science. Mm-hmm. So it kind of captured my imagination right away. All right. So here's the plan to talk about. And so as we talked, before we got on, lots of discussion about performance management. Right. Not a lot of discussion about rewards. I mean, rewards people talk about rewards, but performance management people don't really talk as much about rewards, except when practitioners ask the question, well, how do you do rewards? Practitioners know these things are connected, but I don't think academics necessarily do. So, and I keep running into problem after problem after problem, transforming performance management because of the way reward systems are set up. So I think PM, in my mind, my experience is PM is failing, and it's mostly rewards that are the cause. So I'm going to talk a lot more about rewards, and hopefully, you need to understand this, how these are connected, if you're going to fix it. So you quit spinning your wheels, or so at least you get comfortable spinning your wheels. So at least you understand why you're going to spin your wheels, because no one will make changes to rewards. So
So Alan, I want to highlight, I think that is really the crux of this particular webinar, is that linkage between performance and compensation, which I don't think even HR talks about it as much, but I want to highlight one thing. We looked at Glassdoor data to see what people were saying, particularly in Adobe and at Juniper, which have a long history of having abandoned ratings. And I think that employees do make that connection. They're still thinking about, well, for the work that I did I get fairly rewarded? And so would you agree that that's an important consideration as well in designing effective performance management systems, is to acknowledge what employees are experiencing and what they're expecting from their organizations?
Yeah, absolutely. Because I mean, they're in the middle of playing this game that we'll play, and I'll define more what I mean by that. But and they're doing the best they can to play this game that they don't like. So I think we have to trust that they're in pain for reasons, and that it's useful to actually try to reduce their pain. Because in many cases, I think part of the problem is, this is an HR process. It's not that important. People don't care that much about HR stuff, and you can't fix it anyway. Employees are going to complain regardless, and there's no perfect system. So there's a lot of rationalization that happens in this area, and it's an excuse for not trying anything radical, because people don't believe that that you could actually improve it, and that employees would be happy with it. They think the best that they can do is for them to not be that unhappy. Mm-hmm. And I think that's a cop-out.
Well, take it away from here, and I'd love to hear, for all of us to hear the solutions you're proposing.
So we're going to talk some about, I'm going to talk about the problems with PM and the problems with rewards, the solutions that were being proposed, and whether my analysis, whether I think these will solve the problem. Spoiler alert, I don't think they will. And so then what do? Do we continue to iterate, or do you really transform, and what does that look like?
Wonderful. So I'm going to go off video, let you take it from here.
All right, so let's just start. We're going to have some polls in here. I just want to start with what has it been like for you? What are you, what have you been doing? Have you been making changes to these processes and programs over the past few years? So if you could just kind of pick one we'll take a look.
Yeah, the polls are coming in. Interesting. Well, about 40%, 50% have already responded. All right, for the rest of you, I know that some people actually might be in their commute, so they listen in but may not have access to the polls. So I'm gonna just give it a minute. The question is, if you're just listening in, the question is, how many have made recent changes to performance management and rewards programs? And the options are currently making them, past year, past 2 years, past 3 years. And interesting, we are seeing a bit of a trending topic here, and it's starting to slow down. So I'm going to end the poll and share the results so you can see it. So what do you think, Alan?
So that's about 70% in the last 2 years. That's about either currently making them or made them in the past couple of years. You know, most of the benchmarking data suggests it's about 70% in the last 2 years. So lots of churn in you know, in this process over the years, and lots of time and attention spent designing it, redesigning it, or paying, you know, the consultants to design and redesign it. And that's not even including pay. You know, lots of specialty pay programs like variable pay for sales get, you know, literally reinvented every year. So lots of time and energy on this.
So Alan, so let me ask about the 30% that are not in the category that are, so let's say that someone in our audience, their company has not changed in the last 2 years. Should they be worrying about it?
I would say no. I mean, unless it depends on how much pain they're in. A lot of companies, you know, will just endure the pain. And again, with the rationalization that there's nothing we can do. We tried things in the past, they haven't worked. Everyone else does it the same way we do. So there's no point, and we'll just endure the pain. And others will endure the pain for a couple years and then do something, which is why the cycle is about every 3 years. You know, the first year things get better just because we paid attention to them. The second year, the wheels begin to wobble, and the third year, the wheels begin to come off, and then we do something different again. And that cycle has repeated itself literally for 50 years.
All right. Well, let's see if we can stop that cycle and hopefully start a better cycle that's a little bit more enduring.
Yeah, I mean, as a public service, of course, we can do something, you know, about this. So, what are we complaining about? What are people saying? Well, first of all, let's, you know, define PM 1.0 is you know, what is my shorthand for last generation performance management. This is what everybody does. Okay, so we set goals at the beginning of the year. There's feedback along the way, theoretically, formal reviews, you know, mid-year, certainly at the end of the year, a rating at the end, some kind of quantitative evaluation of your performance, and then rewards distributions based on that. That's how everyone does it. That is PM 1.0, and it is a game. You know, and I say that in kind of, you know, it's in kind of a pejorative way, but it is a game. Employees work for ratings and rewards. That's the game. And it's important to understand that, because if you're playing a game, and, you know, we are playing this game with employees, then much of what we do makes sense. And much of what people recommend makes sense. The question is, should we continue to play the game? Not can we make the game better? So when you're playing a game like this, it makes sense to have ratings. Because if you're going to keep score, employees need to know what the score is. So it's important to understand this is a game, and to think hard about whether we want to continue to try to iterate and improve it. So the reality is nobody likes it. Employees don't like it. Supervisors don't like it. Companies don't like it. You know, it's not fair. Employees don't think it's fair. The right people don't get rewarded for the right things. The wrong things get rewarded. It doesn't help people improve. And surprisingly, you know, to me, this was my catch on this several years ago when I looked at the science, was that the science is not that supportive of what we do, which will come, I think, as a surprise to many people, given that everybody does it this way. And people then get very uncomfortable with the idea of changing. that, could everybody be wrong? And the answer is, yeah. And there are good reasons why nobody changes it. So we'll talk more about that as we get into it. So what are we doing about it? And I monitor this space, and here's what I see people doing. Lots of feedback, lots of focus on feedback. Feedback is the solution. More of it, better feedback, crowdsource it, more people, the better. Ratings, we talked a little bit about. It's hard to call this a trending solution, given that there's not many people that actually changed to move away from ratings. Lots of heat, but not much light. Lots of complaining about ratings, including me and writing about it, presenting about it. But not that many companies actually moved away from ratings, and some of them that did moved back to them. Mostly because in the end, going rating lists will not necessarily solve the problem because it's a bigger problem.
Actually, Alan, could I add something about that?
Yeah.
I'm still hoping that I can bring this story someday. I learned last year that Dow Chemical had gotten rid of ratings in the 90s. And after being ratingless for about, I think, a decade or so, they actually brought back ratings right when everyone else was getting rid of it. And the person who used to lead the process actually shared this at SIOP last year and in a private setting. So I'm really hoping that we can learn something from what happened at Dow.
Yeah. Well, and a lot of the reason people come back to ratings is because they can't pay people. I mean, they're playing this game. And when you play this game and rewards are distributed based on ratings, it's hard to get rid of ratings, because you still have to distribute rewards and differentiate rewards. So again, in the context of the game, you have to have ratings. It's hard not to have ratings. It's doable to differentiate rewards and not have ratings, but a lot of people find it, not optimal.
Oh, well, I hope you talk about that. Yeah.
Yeah, definitely. Oh, yeah. So yeah, rating list was a thing, and then we're keen to throw managers under the bus, and they're not very good. They don't have the courage to really differentiate. Separating evaluation and development, more focus on development. People will like it more if we focus more on development. And one way to do that is to separate these two conversations. So lots of that, lots of simplification, which is a good idea. If people are gonna be in pain, at least make it as little pain as possible for people. Some conversations about goals and OKRs. Although OKRs were not intended to be used this way, they frequently are used this way. And then technology is always being talked about. Again, the questions about whether these will help are, in my mind, very few of these will help for a reason we'll talk about real quick in short order, that this is not why we have PM. It's not to be kinder and gentler to employees. It's to be more mercenary and reptilian and make decisions about employees. It's not really for them. So let's just do another poll and talk about, how much of this have you done? How many of these changes have you made?
I was just going to say, Alan, that what you just said could be very controversial, and I'm now dying to listen to what you have to say. So I'm launching the poll. Please do, share your insights. I think the collective insights that we generate here are really powerful. So thank you for taking the time to do these polls with us. One thing I wanted to highlight that I forgot to share early on is to our audience members, feel free to use the chat function to put in your questions. We're going to lead this webinar more as a conversation. At some point, Alan, maybe you might want this 15-minute to just cover your material, but I know you've mentioned that you're open to taking questions along the way.
Oh, yeah.
So we will have time toward the end, but feel free to also put in chat your question and I'll bring it up at the right time. So in terms of Well, I'll give you just 2 more seconds because I'm seeing that, yep, you're right at 50% now. So about half of you are putting in your ratings. If you are by your computer or on your phone with your screens on, do type in or do enter the poll. Okay, I'm going to end it here. And Alan, over to you.
Yeah, lots of training for managers. Most of the training is around feedback, and it's mostly how to deliver bad news, which is part of the game because not that many, there are not that many top ratings and not many get top rewards. So most people get bad news. So we teach managers to prepare them for that bad news along the way. Lots more, a lot of feedback. This is what most people are talking about: feedback culture, more check-ins. And usually more check-ins means instead of 2, we'll do 4, which is not, is not that dramatic. That's not a continuous process. A lot of simplification, which is very useful, a lot of technology. So yeah, I think a lot of this makes sense, a lot of focus on the manager. And again, I would argue that managers are in a tough spot. They're playing a game they don't like. And they're told to make it be helpful, but they should be good coaches. But the role they play is really primarily judge. They're judges, so it's very tough to get managers comfortable delivering bad news, especially when a lot of times they don't even make the decisions.
Sure.
All right.
I'm going to, so take it away. I'll stop talking and just let you present for the next.
No, that's fine.
All right.
So now again, so that's what people are trying. And, my take on this is not going to work because this is not, the purpose of PM is not development. It's not to give people information to help them improve their performance. It's not, to be kinder and gentler for employees. It's for decision-making. This is from the World at Work report in 2017. And then, the number one reason companies have PM is for reward differentiation. And you don't need data to tell you this. All you need to do is to go to your EVP of HR or your comp person and say, I have this great idea. Let's get rid of performance management. Or go to any employee or any supervisor. The first question out of their mouth isn't, well, how will we develop people? Or how will people know what their strengths and weaknesses are? No, the first thing out of their mouth is, how will we pay people? That's where people lose interest, begin to lose traction, and begin to dig their heels in. This sounds great, except how are we going to pay people? And so none of these things will help if they don't help with that, or if they go counter to that, or if people don't pay attention to that. So, in a world where all your job is to come up with a rating at the end of the year, and not just a rating, you have to have differentiation on that rating in order to drive reward differentiation. Feedback becomes delivering messages. It becomes delivering negative messages to prepare people for them not to get the top ratings and rewards. Development becomes secondary. You don't really talk about development because mostly you're keeping score all year. So these solutions are mostly focused on less important objectives for PM, and it really ignore the idea that it's comp that's really driving this. Comp is the tail that wags the dog, wags the PM dog. So nothing is going to change until that changes. And so the question is that changing? So we'll talk, we'll move to talk about reward programs. These are the kind of traditional reward programs that most of you have. Very familiar to most of you. This is, call this rewards, 1.0. A lot of this is basic, merit increases, variable pay programs of one form or another, bonuses or spot bonuses or year-end bonuses. This is traditional rewards compensation fare. And as you can, all of it requires PM 1.0. You have to have ratings and judgments about performance in order to distribute these rewards. you need algorithms that convert rewards into base pay increases, and there are budgets for all of these. Those budgets depend on efficient distribution of rewards, and the only way to do that is with ratings. So it's not surprising we have trouble making changes to PM when it begins to disrupt, the tidiness with which we convert PM information into reward information. So we're stuck with the game as long as we have, the reward programs that we have. People, work for ratings and rewards. That's the game. And so the question then, is this is what we have, and the question is are there any changes to these on the horizon? And the answer is really, not very many, and not very well. So the question is, are these working? We'll talk about what changes on the next slide, but the question is, are these working? And I think you probably know the answer to this. The answer is not very well. Any of you who've looked at survey data about comp, people are not that happy with how comp is administered and how their pay is increased and how their bonuses are distributed, because they're based on ratings, which are not very good. And this is interesting, despite the fact that we spend a lot of money in the US on these programs. This is an estimate, comes from Jason Shaw and Bear Gerhardt. It's about $345 billion a year just in the US on merit and bonus. That's just in the US every year. So we spend a lot of money and we're not getting much out of it. People are not very happy. Comp people aren't happy, companies aren't happy, employees are not happy, and supervisors aren't happy. And what's interesting is the comp people are, they're when you ask them what the problem is, they think it's money and differentiation, and they would like more of both. They feel like they don't have enough of either. I don't have a big enough budget. If I had a bigger budget, I could differentiate more and give the top more. And that would solve all my problems. Or if I had, supervisors who are more courageous and would differentiate. And you can debate whether that's the case. I'll argue that's not the case. So they're saying 345 billion is not enough. We need more money, and if we had more money, then things would be grand. The employees, it's a familiar story. They're also arguing about fairness on the pay side. My rewards are not matching my performance. I don't understand how to get top ratings and top rewards. It changes every year because it's normative. It's based on how I compare with my peers, and you never know next year what your peers are going to do. So it's always a moving target. The bar is always changing. And it's the Hunger Games all over again. It's a competitive zero-sum game with people fighting for top ratings and rewards, and nobody likes it. Doesn't help. And the bigger problem is that if you ask employees if they want these programs, they say yes. So companies give them, to them. And again, part of the problem is they don't know any different. This is all they've known. We've told them that this is a game and they have to play it. So of course they want, these things. They also think they're better than they are. I mean, most of us think we're above average. And so we think we're going to benefit from these programs because we think we're in the top half, or we're going to get the top rewards. And then we're disappointed when we don't. So employees don't like them either. And and the science doesn't support it either. A lot of which you will find, and many people find, I think, just very difficult to hear, is that the bedrock of how we motivate people in organizations isn't supported by the science very well. This is all we know, and overall, and again, this is fairly complicated. So to do a minute or two on this it doesn't do us justice, but money, it just isn't a strong motivator. And when it does motivate, it doesn't motivate for very long because we adapt to everything new that comes our way in terms of financial rewards. And overall, pay for performance is not that effective, not broadly effective. And when it is effective, it creates all kinds of problems, and unforeseen consequences. And if anybody's ever read any, research in healthcare or in education, you know what the problems of pay for performance are. It creates lots of problems. But this is the way we do it. And even if we could differentiate better, there's lots of research that suggests more differentiation in pay is not necessarily better, either for employees or for companies. So the things that we most count on to motivate employees don't work that well. And it's hard for organizations who've spent the last 50 years building these programs to think about life without them, which is, this makes this process very hard. The change process very hard.
So Alan, we have a question over here, and I think the science part. I know I have some questions, but let me read out one of our audience members' questions. This is from Tim Collins, and he says, in a not-profit he works at a not-for-profit, there is zero tie between performance management and compensation because financial rewards are generally not available. Theoretically, they should make performance management easier to improve, but he's saying not necessarily true.
Yeah, I mean, so my question would be, first of all, in those organizations, are people happy? I mean, are you able to get people in the door? Are you able to keep people? People in those organizations are motivated by different things. There's a stronger kind of, meaning and purpose motive. That's why people are there. So, I wouldn't implement traditional performance management programs in those organizations anyway. All you will do is confuse people. You don't want to tie between pay and performance. You don't even want to tie in pay and performance in for-profit organizations because you can't measure performance well enough. So I would argue we shouldn't be messing around with these programs in not-for-profits or in the government, really, or in anywhere else. And part of the trouble becomes assuming that these are best practices and assuming that in order to be, like the cool kids, you got to implement these programs. You're better off saying, these are not the programs for me anyway. And I think you can run into trouble trying to implement these programs that are focused on money and financial rewards when the more important motives for you are service and a larger calling that you need to emphasize. That's why people get motivated in not-for-profits and in the government, and that we could learn a lot from those organizations. And I'm going to say more about that at the end in terms of how you do this differently. Is you act more like and you tap into those deeper, more important motives.
So Alan, you said something that's really important. For a company to decide to know what's going to work in their organization, they have to understand what motivates their employees. Correct?
Yeah.
Okay. All right.
And that isn't that unique. I think what motivates, we'll talk at the toward the end about what are the important motives that you need to tap, that you need to turn PM and rewards loose on. And money isn't the most important one. Mm-hmm. These are much more the more powerful motives are more intrinsic. Also makes them they're harder to deal with. It's easy to throw money at people. The question is more, we spend $345 billion. What do we get for that? And I would argue people perform despite us spending $345 billion a year on incentives and not because of it. And when you put that number on it, all of a sudden it becomes, this doesn't just become HR stuff that's not that important. It becomes, this is a lot of money and we're wasting it. Potentially, we could put it to better use. So what are we doing to fix it? And these are the solutions. Again, I monitor this space. This is what I see coming from the comp world. And it's really, there's not a lot new. It's mostly more of the same, and it's mostly tinkering at the edges. And this chart really, I think, is very important. And it suggests, this is from Deloitte, 2017. asking, people, what are the most important considerations for you when you think about total reward strategy? And, pay attention to number one, it's cost, okay? It's not effectiveness, or it's not, are we motivating our best people? It's not, how do we get higher performance out of the 345 billion we spend? It's how much are we spending? And it's cost because, you're having to toe the line on cost like everybody else. You're not getting bigger budgets. You're not getting more money. And if anything, you're getting less because most organizations are underspending their merit budgets and their bonus budgets. And I spent 30 years in big companies. That there was never a single year where I was not told to spend less. You get 1.0, but come in at 0.95, because in case we have to cut spending, during the year. So cost is the big concern for organizations. They want more money to differentiate more, but they're not going to get it. And so what are they doing? They're doubling down, differentiating even more to get more, to top performers of that fixed budget. They're playing with optics. They're talking about total rewards and, to make things sound more, like they're getting more. But they're just putting more in the rewards, idea in general. Or they're taking spot bonuses, or they're taking merit and pouring it into spot bonuses because they look bigger. $30 a month, doesn't look that big, but if you aggregate it into a quarterly or semi-annual bonus, it looks bigger, but it's still the same amount of money. So it's mostly optics. A lot of communication and marketing, making people feel better about what they've got. So these aren't, and these things are not going to change the world for PM. We're still differentiating. We're still using ratings to distribute rewards. So the world doesn't change for PM under these new ideas. And a lot of these ideas are not new. It's mostly tinkering at the edges. So, it's clear from this that we still believe in the game. And the idea is to tinker with it until it works, or to bring to focus on other things that are going to motivate beyond money. But to be very clear, these people wish they had more money. They don't really believe in these other things. They're doing them just to do something for employees, to help improve morale, help improve the mood and engagement. And total rewards or better marketing or better optics will help, at least in their mind. So I'm kind of curious now, what of these are you doing?
Alan, if in the previous slide, we actually have a comment from Dax Howard, who might actually have some insight on that Deloitte data, considering he works at Deloitte. So he says, one of the reasons cost is the largest concern is because effectiveness is so hard to measure. How can we measure employee effectiveness so we can turn cost into a ratio instead of a flat number? Is this going to so he wants to know if you're going to address this.
No.
Okay, maybe that's a
no. I mean, the idea is that effectiveness really is difficult to measure, at least when you're talking about like performance. I don't know if he's talking about the performance of people or effectiveness of programs. The effectiveness of these programs are fairly easy to measure, relatively speaking. At least institutional research, that's how much are you spending and how are you, what's the return you're getting in improved, improved performance or improved engagement. And what you find in at least the published research where they have done, lots of, within company studies and outside company studies is more spend on variable pay doesn't necessarily translate into better company performance, better employee performance, lower turnover, and so on. That there isn't as strong a return on the cost investment as you would expect. So that, I think that the ROI is pretty clear from the research that the spend isn't there, or the investment in variable pay, individual variable pay isn't there. There's a better return on investment for spend on organizational variable pay, like profit sharing, gain sharing, equity, programs, things like that. That's where the return on investment is. You just don't, and you don't get the negative side effects from those programs.
Wow, that's really powerful. That's really important what you just shared.
Yeah, and that to me is going to be the solution, is to get away from those programs where the return isn't there and the effectiveness isn't there, and move to tapping motives that are effective in driving improved performance, and implementing reward programs that are effective in driving improved performance at the organizational level. Because there are those programs, but they just don't fit with our mindset. I mean, they sound very socialistic, and we fear that people are going to check out if they don't perceive a direct tie between their individual behavior and performance and their individual rewards. So we have some selling and some change management work to do, but I think it's doable.
Wow, that brings a lot of hope, actually. So
yeah, I think there's hope, for sure. So let's find out what you're doing. Are you playing around in this space? Are your comp people changing the mix? Moving towards some of these spot bonuses that are given during the year. This is actually the poll that should come next.
Okay.
So the question here is more around, are you implementing these kind of iterative tactical changes, like changing the reward mix, changing the number of scale points on your rating scale, training supervisors, going to more feedback? Or are you implementing things that are more transformational, like more team and organizational based reward programs, getting rid of ratings, tapping meaning and purpose and belonging instead of, and getting rid of individual incentive programs? That's more transformational stuff. Wow. So I'd love to hear what you're doing there.
So I closed the poll. There's a clear trend here. Amazing. Huh.
I'd be surprised if I would be surprised if there were lots of transformational stuff, lots of iteration. Again, it's not surprising. People don't want to spend a lot of time and energy on this because they don't think they can improve it. I'm here to tell you, I think you can improve it, and I think it's worth making transformational change, but it's going to require completely different thinking. And so this to me is the kind of the crux of the argument. So we spend all our time on the left side of this chart, iterating. The last 50 years, iterating. With I think is hard to argue that we've made any progress at all. And so, the work that we're doing on the left side of this chart is in the orbit of the same basic kind of thinking of the game, right? That we'll work for rewards and top ratings. And so the iteration is, how can we improve the ratings? How can we improve the rewards? How can we improve the connection? And so on. And again, we haven't changed our thinking. This is just iterating on the basis of traditional assumptions about how you motivate high performance in employees, carrots and sticks, money, and so on. And so a lot of what we've done is try to reduce the pain, try to make changes on the margin, make it kinder and gentler so employees like it more, and trying to get better supervisors. And again, the idea is to make it less of a headwind. Okay, so the assumption is it's going to be a headwind. Let's make it's going to hurt, and frankly, let's make it suck less. And this will help. I mean, you will get some benefit from it, but it's not as big as you think, okay? Because it goes away after a while. The idea is really, if you want to move to the right and you want to fix this and turn it from a headwind into a tailwind, you have to do things differently. And it starts with your thinking. You have to realize that a lot of these antiquated assumptions and beliefs, classical economics, classical psychological stimulus response thinking, that these are not, these are antiquated. They were, developed in the industrial era when you could measure performance and you could count things, and jobs were simple and stable and so on, which is not the case today. So if you're going to fix this, it's going to require thinking differently and different assumptions, different beliefs about how you motivate people. But it's doable. And so the question is, how far are you, really willing to go? So this is the, so this was the poll we just did, and most of you, are on the iteration side, okay? And the question is, is that where you want to be? This is the prior poll that we were, when we were talking about, the trending solutions for rewards, which of these things are you signing up for? I'm curious as to whether anybody's, implementing spot bonuses or changing the reward mix, and so on. I should have added, more organizational and profit sharing and others to this, because those would actually be helpful. And a lot of companies have those, but they don't feel like they're that useful for them. They don't emphasize them that much. And overall company performance doesn't figure as much in the multiplier for people's individual rewards. The individual performance is a bigger multiplier. And I would argue we should change that.
So let's give people, I think this is an important one. We have a lot of collective intelligence in this particular chart. So if you haven't voted already, please do. I'm going to close it in just a couple seconds here. Okay, I think it looks like it stopped. So sharing this. There you go.
Ah, interesting. Yeah, and again, I could be accused of being cynical. Which I have been accused of being cynical. The idea around non-cash rewards and recognition is that, and that's great. We should be doing that, but it's not. But organizations are not really committed to that. They would, if you said, would you rather, Mr. Compensation or Miss Compensation Professional, would you rather have a sleek, cool new recognition system, or would you rather have more money? They will say, I would rather have more money. They really don't believe recognition and non-cash rewards are substitutes for cash. And the reality is they are, but you have to think differently about them. You can't, once you got rid of, the kind of mercenary individualistic programs, and if you implemented recognition programs well, then they would matter. A lot of focus on transparency. Yeah, not a surprise. Some spot bonuses, a lot more. Not as much changing the mix. I would have expected more people tinkering with the mix. Yeah, no, all good and all expensive to mess around with these programs. A lot of companies don't add up the amount of time and energy and money they spend tinkering with these programs. And just the simplification value alone would be there, versus continuing to tinker with these every year.
Alan, you have just a time check. You have 10 minutes.
Yeah. Okay. So I think the question is, what does transformation look like? What would we do in the future? And as I said, it requires the first change requires different thinking. And this is true mental model shifts. And so, the big shift is, how do you motivate people? And you motivate people without money. And there's decades of research on this. Again, this is very difficult for seasoned line managers, even seasoned HR people to hear, is that money isn't the big motivator that we think it is. That the things that really matter in getting people up and getting people to work, and the not-for-profits and the government agencies have this, but they don't always like it because they would rather have the money, because they're so influenced by what's best, quote, best practice in organizations. But what really gets people up and out the door every morning is working on something that's bigger than them, something that's really important, and feeling like they're going to make progress on it, and living and working in an environment that's relatively speaking more positive than negative. Where you're not getting lined up, and you're not getting a corrective interview, and you're not getting negative feedback every day. And then other motives like belonging. Hearing a lot about belonging in the context of diversity and inclusion. But people are working in teams. We should leverage that. People like working with other people, especially people that are all working on toward the same goals. And then connect people with the work, help them get better and deeper. Mastery and competence are really important, which is why L&D, leadership development, training development, all those things, people want that stuff. They want to grow and they want to get better. So shift one is separating motivation from money, and separating motivation from managing compensation. So the other big shift is to think about managing compensation without differentiation. So how can we grow how can we pay people well? How can we grow people's pay over time? And how can we share the wealth? That's the key. If you do that, people will work hard. They're not going to check out. The focus is on these programs is more on we instead of me. When we win, I win. That's really the thinking. The new thinking in managing compensation without these mercenary, individualistic variable pay programs that pit people against one another, kind of Hunger Games. And these programs work. The research suggests these programs work well, and they don't have all these nasty side effects that individual variable pay programs have. And given the kind of changes that are happening in the work and in organizations, in the environments, with much more team-based work, much more uncertainty and instability, these programs, traditional PM 1.0 and Reward 1.0 programs, are not going to work because you don't have the stability, you don't have the predictability, you don't have the clarity about who's going to do what, because it changes all the time, and you give it to the team to work out. You don't assign it, at the beginning of the year, because things change. The day after that you create these performance contracts. So this is what the future looks like. I mean, for me, it's and I think the big change for PM 1.0 or PM 2.0 is that it's not a reward process. It's not an HR process. It serves the business. It needs to be a process for getting people aligned, for creating strategic priorities, and for providing direction and alignment. It's not an HR process. There are other ways to make these HR decisions without traditional PM 1.0 output. And I think you'll find that you can do that. I mean, we found that at the company I used to work for. Other companies have found that they could make these decisions. It requires some energy, but it's certainly possible. And in PM 2.0, goals are the center instead of evaluate. Ratings and differentiation are the center of PM 1.0. Goals and the meaning and the purpose they provide are the centerpiece for PM 2.0. Goals are not contracts. Goals are the path to motivation, and which is why progress is so important. Progress is much more fundamental in PM 2.0 than feedback is. It's progress against, toward goals that motivates people, not feedback. Feedback, what causes problems with feedback is it gets disconnected from people's goals. And so that's why I like focusing on progress. Feedback is a part of that, but it keeps goals front and center. And then positivity, much more focus on positivity and positive feedback relative to negative feedback. And it's PM 2.0 is designed for teams. The work happens in teams, teams set objectives, teams meet to do reviews, and teams get rewarded. And on the reward side, we talked about this already. It's three things, maybe four things. Pay people well. So market-based pay, increase market-based pay for your top people. Pay them above market, and grow their pay over time. Give them cost of living adjustments to deal with inflation. Market-based pay increases. Promote people more often. Go back to narrow banding so you can do that. Pay the person instead of the job, which is what we do anyway. We just do it on the side. And then share the wealth, much more focus on organizational incentive programs like profit sharing, gain sharing, so-called shared capitalism programs. And then lots of focus on non-monetary recognition programs, investments in training and development. So invest in everybody. This is what people want. It's what builds competence and motivation and mastery. So, not easy. None of this is easy. And, you still have to manage poor performance. You still need a PIP process. And you still need to take care of your hypos. And if the only thing you do for your hypos is dump a bucket of money in their lap every year, you're going to lose them anyway. There are lots of other things you will continue to do for them. And then, I'm kind of curious from you, whether, what handicap this for your organization? Would you consider signing up for this? What do you think your people, your senior leaders, your senior HR people would sign up for something more transformational? And be honest. I mean, I know if everybody said absolutely, sign me up, I'd say you're all lying. Because I'm out there, dealing with companies and consulting with companies now, and it's a tough sell. But
Alan, you just switched the ratings with that comment. I'm sorry, I'm just kidding.
Oh. Yeah, if people said, I shouldn't have said anything. I should have said, sign me up. It's tough. And to be clear, you have to be running, the way to do this is not to run away from PM 1.0, it's to run towards something else. So what's the kind of organization you're going to create for the future to deal with the chaotic environment and the new business environment and the new way of working that you're going to deal with? What's the environment you need and the culture you need, and design PM 2.0 to propel people toward that instead of running away from PM 1.0. More people, that's more people than I would have thought. A lot of people are fine with PM 2.0. What they're not fine with is giving up PM 1.0. You've got them with kinder, gentler development, more feedback, gain sharing, profit sharing, all that. But when you say, oh yeah, and you have to give up all the variable pay programs and you have to give up your performance ratings, that's where they dig their claws in and you drag them kicking and screaming away from it. So it sounds great until they find out how am I going to do everything I want to do without rewards, or for rewards without ratings and so on. So I'm optimistic with these results that maybe people would make the pitch. I'm glad to see it. I hope you go back and make the pitch for sure, because at least 45% of you should make the pitch.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, that's very optimistic for sure. All right, I'll stop sharing. Continue.
All right. Do you want to do Anybody? Yeah. So, do you want more on this? Um, um, because there's certainly more to be talked about in terms of learning. I'm going to do a half a day workshop and at the end of October with the Center for Effective Organizations, and that could easily be a day. So there's plenty. There's plenty of work to be done in terms of talking tactically. How would you do this? Or if you can't do it all, then what would you do? What are there any ways to go part way? And there's certainly some, but the further you go, the better.
So this is an important one. One of the things we're looking to do is how do we bring these trending topics and make them more accessible to people around the world? And we're talking to Alan to see if he'd be open to doing these live workshops online. It could be an hour or a couple hours, but multi-part workshops. So if there's interest, we'll certainly continue to explore that with Alan. So I'm going to stop the polling and share the results. It sounds like there's a lot of interest right now.
Good.
So that sounds great, Alan. We'll continue to explore and maybe do some focus groups with the people to see what they would like.
Yeah, absolutely.
And then maybe we should just continue because we're right at the hour.
You want to skip the next poll?
Mm-hmm. Yeah, I think so.
So I'm happy. Here's how you find me. I'm happy to talk, connect with me any way you want. And I've written lots of articles on LinkedIn and on my blog site as well. So I'm not sure we have time for questions, but if somebody wants to submit questions, I'm happy to answer them outside of this. If they want to go ahead and type a question in, I'll be glad to answer it outside of this. If Shreya will forward them on to me.
Absolutely. So I do, while these questions are coming in, let me ask you one of them that has come up. Would non-rating systems work better if poor performance was addressed? And this is a question from Irvin Yankovic.
Yeah, I mean, I don't think so. I think you still need a poor performance system, like you're in trouble system, performance improvement process. But to me, that's a separate process than performance management. You still need to aggressively manage poor performance, but the problem with PM ratings in general is they're not very high quality. I mean, there are lots of bias, lots of error. Tell you mostly about the raters, not the people being rated and their achievements. So, but to be clear, and you don't need a rating for your supervisors to tell you who's in trouble. They know who's in trouble. And once they get into trouble, your supervisor puts them into the performance improvement process with completely different rules, different documentation requirements, and so on. But that's a different process. Don't put the 99.5% of your employees through an onerous documentation process just so you can deal with the 5% or the 0.5% or 2% or whatever the number is. So I don't think being aggressive on poor performance would necessarily help the rating process. But I think it will help PM 2.0. You still need it, and you can still tell it. It's one of the most important kind of planks in a pay for performance philosophy, is that we don't tolerate poor performance. So you still need that. I think it's more important now than ever.
Right. Well, thank you. Well, thank you everyone for joining us. And Alan, I can tell that we've seen great level of engagement. People have stayed the entire time. So you've hit a button, but also you've presented a very optimistic story. I think there's hope for everyone who's been struggling with performance management. I see a great deal of value in the science-based advice that you've provided. I think that we should definitely explore the idea of the workshop where we can make these more actionable. So we'll be back in touch with everyone. Again, if you want to stay in touch with human capital growth, you'll get access to these slides and you can respond and let us know that you'd like to continue to receive messages from us or send us an email to insights@humancapitalgrowth.com. And until then, I'm Shreya Sarkar-Barney from Human Capital Growth, and we'll see you again in our next webinar.
Thanks, everybody.
Thank you.